Have you ever wondered how embracing who you are right now could actually skyrocket your success? Today's guest is here to prove that radical self acceptance isn't just a catchword, it's the key to unlocking your full potential. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of No Woman Left Behind. I'm Rosie Zilinskas, and today we're diving into a topic that could completely transform the way you approach your career and life. If you have ever felt like you're juggling too much or you're holding yourself back, this episode is for you. We are going to explore why self-acceptance doesn't mean settling, how high achievers can finally break free from that constant stress, and the simple shifts that can make advocating for yourself at work feel natural and empowering. And we're all about self-advocacy here at No Woman Left Behind. Joining us today is Dr. Laura Gallaher. She is a leadership and culture specialist who helps individuals and teams transform from the inside out. Dr. Laura has helped transform organizations such as Disney and NASA, so she is extremely well versed in change management. So with that, get ready because this conversation will leave you with fresh insights and practical tips that you can apply right away. So let's dive in.
Are you ready to accelerate your career? Whether you're just starting out, making your move up the ladder, or ready to take the fast lane, there's one question you need to ask yourself: where do I stand? Introducing the Promotion Readiness Quiz. In just a few minutes, discover if you're an emerging leader, a progressive pro, or a career trailblazer. Get tailored tips and strategies to help you grow, elevate your skills, and move forward faster. Take the quiz now and step into the next chapter of your career with confidence. Your career breakthrough starts here. Take the Promotion Readiness Quiz now.
All right, good morning, Dr. Laura. How are you doing today?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy to have you here. We're going to have a great conversation. I do have a question for you, which I used this as an icebreaker recently. If you were to be an appliance, what appliance would you be and why?
Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm going to share the first thought that came up, even if it's terrible. I think I would say that I'm a blender. And I think that's because the work that I get to do often really shakes things up for people, breaks down a lot of what they have previously thought about themselves or about the world, but then puts it into a form that's that much more like digestible and hopefully delicious.
I love that response. And I was actually thinking that you were going to say blender for that
Really?
very reason, because as a coach, and it's so funny because you almost like mirrored my exact answer, because when you're a coach, you have all different things going on, and a lot of times you kind of have to figure out what to pick out from all the tumultuous conversation that's going on in someone's head. So I
much
love
unwinding and putting it in a clear,
yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we're going to talk about a variety of things, but the very first thing that I want to talk to you about is that pesky radical self-acceptance. As you well know, we cater to women in the corporate space that are maybe feeling stuck, or I know we're going to talk about high achievers as well. But Dr. Laura, it is so hard in this day and age to know what to pay attention to externally. But then I think all of the noise externally, almost kind of like the blender, there's so much information coming in that sometimes I have to sit there and think about, okay, what do I think about that one topic? How do I feel about that? And then if it does impact me personally, then how am I going to weave that into my life? And then as far as like myself in the world, how can I do that radical self-acceptance and not put myself in either harm's way, which is emotionally, with my integrity. So why don't we start talking about what is radical self-acceptance, and then we can dive in after that.
Yeah. So self-acceptance, most simply, is being okay with who you are right now,
Mm.
which includes being okay with your flaws and imperfections. And it also includes being okay with your talents and your strengths. And radical self acceptance, the reason that I include the word radical is because sadly, it is fairly radical for people to actually have self acceptance. And especially, I think, high achievers or women in corporate feeling a little bit stuck. We are so hard on ourselves
Yeah.
and we are so consumed with self judgment that the idea of accepting ourselves feels way too radical. And we have a million reasons we give ourselves as to why we can't accept ourselves. We don't want to accept ourselves. And I think it's one of the most misunderstood ideas in psychology, but it's one of the most powerful. And so I am extremely passionate about helping people and women understand what is it and how can they change their understanding of it so that they want to cultivate a self-acceptance practice.
I love that. And so accepting us ourselves as who we are, like you said, our flaws,
Yep.
but also our strengths, because we all have flaws. Nobody's perfect. We're all human beings. But let's just say you were working with a client that didn't like their flaws or were struggling with their flaws. And I'm not necessarily saying any kind of disability or anything like that, just like
Mm-hmm.
follow through, for example. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'm terrible at following through on whatever. So, how do you teach your clients to embrace ourselves just as we are? And in the corporate space, sometimes your strengths may not be the things that you need for the job that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of dichotomy there. So let's talk about that.
So the first thing that I often do is help my clients understand that self-acceptance and self-improvement are not on opposite ends of a single continuum. I think this is probably the biggest misunderstanding that people have. And so the fear is if I accept myself, I'm just going to become complacent. That's a
Ah.
fallacy because the opposite of self-acceptance isn't self-improvement. The opposite of self-acceptance is self-judgment. And so that's kind of the first thing to unwind is this recognition that there's no part of me that has to stop growing or improving who I am as a human being just because I am practicing self acceptance. So the question is I know I'm going to keep improving myself. I know your clients and your listeners are going to keep improving themselves. Do they want to do that from the lens of judging themselves and beating themselves up? Or do they want to do that from a place of feeling good enough and just
Mm.
moving toward even better? And the research is super clear that when people can focus on self improvement from the self acceptance lens, they grow faster and it's a much more enjoyable journey. They experience less stress. It's literally the key to making everything in your life easier, practicing more self acceptance. So we have to unwind that first. This idea that accepting myself means I'm going to stop growing and improving.
Oh my gosh, I think that was like a huge light bulb moment for me. And of course, I know a lot about neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is becoming more and more of a word that's out in social media, and people are talking about it because we know that our brains are not static, that we can actually um, create or build neurons based on that self improvement. So I love that definition because you're absolutely right. Just because I accept the way that I am doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to continue to improve the
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I'm like, oh, why do I not follow through on again X, Y, or Z? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that, especially being an entrepreneur, we have the shiny object syndrome, of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I talk to a lot of other entrepreneurs and they're like, oh, I didn't complete that course. That was the first thing that came to mind. It's like you buy all these courses and then you don't complete them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And so getting people to recognize that, okay, self acceptance can coexist with self improvement. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, Rosie, is there is no amount of self improvement that will ever make up for a lack of self acceptance.
Mm.
So this is the lie we tell ourselves that all I have to do is follow through and finish that course. And then I'll be good enough to accept myself as I am. But as soon as you do that, as soon as you hit that milestone, and probably honestly before, you uncover, oh, here's this gap now. Here's this thing about myself that I want to change. And now once again, you're like, well, I can't accept myself now because look at this gap that exists.
Mm.
But pragmatically, we're all always going to want to continue growing. We're always going to have more goals that we want to achieve. So that becomes a really terrible reason to not accept yourself right now. And so getting to
Absolutely.
that place, it's like, okay, hopefully now your listeners are at least bought into, okay, I'm listening, right? What is this self-acceptance thing? Maybe I do want more of this for myself. How do I do that? What does that actually look like?
Imagine a space where your career aspirations are supported by a community that truly understands your journey. A space designed for women like you, ready to elevate their careers. Our monthly membership includes everything from expert training and monthly workshops to a custom career roadmap. Join a supportive community where group coaching and networking turn your professional goals into achievable milestones. Celebrate your wins with a network of women who are as invested in your success as you are. Unlock the leader within.
I recently started doing some energy work,
Ooh,
meditation,
yes.
and it's interesting because you so the energy work that I'm doing is like you do a lot of deep breathing and you take the time to feel the emotions that
Mm-hmm.
you're experiencing. And the way the body works, or this program specifically, the more you breathe into it and you allow your body to feel those emotions, that's when the release comes
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to heal that particular hurt or wound. And the way the brain is and emotionally, when you think you've healed something
Mm-hmm.
and another act happens or another situation happens, it pops up again and then you have to heal it again. And it's just
Yes.
a constant evolution. So I think, to your point with self-acceptance, you're always going to have to choose that self-acceptance in spite of the things that happen. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about what can someone do. So how do you work with your clients in order to get them to self or to accept themselves?
Yeah. And I'm going to come back to that. And I just wanted to let you know, my experience mirrored what you said so closely, Rosie, this idea that I can be present with what is, I can feel through the emotion, and that is the healing. And then there's going to be something else that bubbles up. And it's the constant evolution is your language. And I literally have the word journey tattooed on my wrist
Oh,
as a
okay.
reminder to myself that there is no destination in this
Mhm.
work, that
Yeah.
the journey is all we have,
Mhm.
and that I am always going to be uncovering the next thing within me that I would like to heal, the next thing within me I want to accept. And so I just want to let you know how
Oh,
much
I
that
love
resonated
that.
with me.
I love that. Yeah.
So, are you familiar with the concept of self compassion?
Absolutely. Yes.
I figured that you would be, right? And Kristen Neff is a wonderful expert in that area. I know Tara Brock also does some wonderful work in this area. And so self compassion is a really key practice in building up self acceptance. So if we take your example of, oh, I didn't follow through, I didn't finish that course, I would invite you to look at what is the compassion that you would like to offer yourself. How can
Hmm.
you look at what was going on for you, what you were struggling with, even some of what you were struggling with, maybe subconsciously, that wasn't even fully in your awareness, that led you to make the decisions that you did. And so, a self compassion practice is really inviting some of that same softness into ourselves that we often will give to other people around us that we love so much, but we fail to turn it inward.
Yes.
And this can feel very foreign for people. It can feel very, it brings up a lot of like, but I don't deserve compassion, or, but this isn't okay. I have to be able to follow through. And so, once again, it's that recognition that self acceptance and self improvement coexist. Just because you're offering yourself compassion for something that you want to change about yourself, you're offering yourself compassion for not following through to the degree that you want, doesn't mean that you're not going to set a standard for yourself about what's
Hmm.
okay for yourself in the future and what you want to do differently. These things,
Hmm.
once again, it coexists, since there's a lot of paradox theory that we get into to really invite people to want to have that self acceptance practice and that self compassion. So, talking
Mm.
to yourself like you would speak to a best friend is one of the simplest ways that I work to ease into a self acceptance practice.
Yes, because sometimes we're so mean to ourselves, right?
So
It's
mean.
like you're cursing yourself, and you would never do that to your best friend or to your child or to your parent.
Yeah.
And why is it that we allow that mean girl talk to ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
It's just craziness sometimes.
I know. And it's so pervasive. It's so common. And there's so much that's coming up for me around this. So, I mean, I know that I even said, like, how would you speak to a best friend? But one of the hard truths about self-acceptance is if I am struggling to speak kindly to myself or speak gently to myself, I will, I'm going to convince myself that I'm really kind and compassionate toward other people. But there's actually a deeper aspect of that that's I'm people pleasing. And I
Mm.
am actually simply trying to manage this person's impression of me because we really cannot be truly kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. And so
Got
that's usually
it.
like a kind of a painful thing for people to sit with and recognize that there's this, oof, okay, so there's maybe some part of me that's judging this person. I'm offering them compassion, but I am kind of thinking the same harsh thoughts toward them that I direct toward myself. It might hang out in my subconscious, but it's there. And so, to really increase our genuine, authentic kindness and connection with other people, once again, we want to start with offering compassion inwardly.
Hmm. And that obviously applies to anything, but when you're at work and you say you don't like a coworker or whatever, sometimes your brain will react, that thought will pop into your head without even wanting to think those things, like, oh, like I hate her dress, for example.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're like thinking that, and you're like, oh, why, like, where did that thought come from? Because obviously thoughts just pop into your head all day long. And then, like, for me, when something like that pops up, I'm like, oh, why did I think that? But I try to at least recognize that I'm thinking about it, that it's popped into my head, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to think that way, so I kind of just like let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, what is one, even if like I'm walking through the airport, like what's one good thing that I can think about that one person?
Oh,
So I'm trying
yeah.
to
Yeah. Choosing the inner monologue.
yes,
Yeah, that's
yes.
powerful.
Yeah.
A lot of the work that I do too actually invites this, see, this is the essence of self-acceptance is am I willing to look at the things about myself that I don't really like? And
Hmm.
I'm with you, Rosie. I also still notice judging other people. I will have judgmental thoughts in my mind. And there's part of me that just wants to go, oh, that's not good. I shouldn't judge them and just try to suppress it or push it out or just, change how I'm thinking. And I see a lot of merit in that. And the self acceptance work actually says, well, let's hold on, let's pull that judgment back in here for a second. And, Dr. Brene Brown
Um,
talks about we judge others where we have the greatest capacity for shame. So
yes. Oh gosh.
let myself look at that. Let myself look at this like, okay, I'm judging this person for fill in the blank for what they're wearing or for their behavior because I would never do that. Right? That's one of those like red flags of like, oop, okay, I'm sitting in
Hmm.
judgment, which means I have a huge capacity for shame here. That means that I am not willing to accept the parts of myself that either have done that same thing, have engaged in that way, or has the capacity to. And I'm unwilling to look at it. And if I'm not willing to look at something, I have no shot at changing it. And
Hmm.
that's part of why higher self acceptance actually increases self improvement because I let myself better know what my full experience is in order to actually
Right.
accept it and move through it.
Gosh, oh my God. And it goes even one level deep, with Brene Brown, then you're being vulnerable. Even if you're vulnerable to yourself,
Yes.
you still feel all those feelings, and
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's a lot to feel those feelings. And
Yeah.
uh that's why I think meditation has been so incredible for me,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm allowing myself to like feel all those feelings and release
Mm-hmm.
the emotions. But again, this work is always going to be there. Even the people that I work with that are experienced meditators for a long time, they're like, this work never stops because we're human beings
Yes.
until, we move on to wherever it is that we move
Whatever's
on
next.
to. Yeah,
Yep.
whatever's next. So how would you suggest a female in the corporate world, let's just say they're struggling with trying to self-advocate for themselves?
Mhm.
Because I think women come to me and they're like, can you please help me with my career? And yes, it's a lot of the tactical and strategies, but a lot of it is the confidence,
Mhm.
because they're not able to articulate what it is that they want, or they're afraid, or they don't think they're good communicators, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But what is like one thing that you think we can talk about where a corporate female can start working on when they're struggling with that?
So struggling to advocate for themselves in terms of, are you speaking about letting people know the wonderful things that they're accomplishing at work? Are you speaking about, hey, this is my opinion on this subject and I really think it's valuable? Any, all of the above?
The communication more than anything. It's like, okay, I have this idea and I want
Mhm.
to talk about it, but I'm afraid,
Mhm.
or I did these accomplishments and I don't know exactly how to communicate them to the leadership team with confidence.
So much of this is going to be recognizing what is the story in their head. So
Mm,
at any point in time, so if I'm thinking to myself that I've accomplished these things and I would really like to make sure people understand that I'm getting these things done and I'm having this kind of impact, if they're not just doing it, then there is at least one, maybe multiple stories in their head that are telling them not to and telling them why they shouldn't. There's probably pieces of they're judging the part of them that even wants to do it. And so they surface the narrative. Like, what is the narrative? Let it bubble up. And
mm.
maybe it's multiple. Those stories are almost always rooted in distorted ideas that we picked up in our upbringing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so it's like, where did this story come from? And maybe it wasn't upbringing. Some people, for example, maybe did work in a job and they advocated for themselves once and they had maybe a jerk of a boss who squashed them or said, you seem really arrogant or how dare you be, right? Maybe they had a kind of a lowercase t traumatizing incident, even as an adult, that they're now carrying forward. But either way, what is the story in my head? What is the story in my head about somebody who advocates for themselves? What do I think about somebody who does this? Because there's some level of identity threat that's stopping them from doing what seems like a simple behavior. So you talk about the fear that holds them back, and it's always going to come back to that kind of self concept level, that identity level. They probably have some narrative of like, you're not supposed to, don't brag. Nobody likes a
Mm,
bragger. If that's something that you heard growing up and now you're in the workplace and you're sort of rigidly opposed to ever advocating for yourself, but you look around and you see other people doing it and then they get promoted for it. Okay, there is some distortion here in the narrative that's running in your mind. So you want to let yourself surface all the stories, even the ones that you judge, right? Especially the ones that you judge. What is that
yeah.
story?
Wow. That is so incredible because, again, in the work that I've been doing more recently, it's like, okay, Rosie, where did you learn that behavior?
Mhm.
Who told you that
Yes.
you should continue to push forward and not feel your emotions?
Mhm.
And so I'm not going to name any names, but it's like, well, I was growing up. So it's just so interesting that how you develop as a child, how
Mhm.
you follow the examples of parents, teachers,
Yes.
whatever, that translates into your adult life. And then you're trying to not fix anything because we're all perfect as we are, but that constant self-improvement and that, like you said, that discovery, that conversation, that judgment, the vulnerability, it all comes into play. And sometimes when you sit there and you're like, why can I not schedule a conversation with my manager to talk about my career aspirations?
Mhm.
That's when we need to start, following the thread and figure
Yeah,
out where that conversation is coming from. Oh my
absolutely. Yeah,
gosh.
whose voice is that? Whose voice
Yes.
is that? And then, when my clients are ready, because they're often not ready at first, and that's fine. I was not either. But when they're ready, the source of that voice, the source that perhaps led you, Rosie, to believe that you should push emotions down, don't feel those, just keep going. Can you offer compassion to that human
Mm-hmm.
who was also raised by humans? And I love how you say like we're all perfect as we are. And I often will say like we're all imperfect and we know that intellectually, but they were also raised by imperfect or imperfectly perfect humans. And so
Yes.
there's a lot of cascading that can happen. So instead of me shifting into a blame, and yeah, how dare they? It's their fault, which by the way, some of us don't want to do that, which means we don't look at it at all. I love my parents. My parents were great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love my parents and how they raised me brought a lot of great and also brought some not so great. That's just the
Yeah.
nature of it. Am I willing to look at that without vilifying them? So if I can look at the source of where this narrative came from and I can offer compassion to that source, oof, that is magic
Yeah,
at that
that
point.
is magic. Yeah, that is and that's part of the meditation, the energy healing work too. So it's so interesting to me how it all weaves into the person and then the things that you end up doing and then your career. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just you cannot get away from it, you
There's
know.
no escapism. Yeah.
There's no escape. And a lot of times people are like, okay, if I start working with someone, because I'm a certified high performance coach, and that's more of leadership versus career. And they're like, no, no, I just want to talk about business stuff, professional,
Mm-hmm.
but the
Mm-hmm.
personal always comes into play.
Always. Oh my gosh, we are whole humans and we're humans everywhere. And I love that you've been focusing so much on meditation. And I love, Rosie, your focus on the emotion because self acceptance has a really close tie to self awareness.
Hmm.
And letting ourselves actually know the emotions that we're feeling and feeling through them is actually the fastest way for people to grow their self awareness. I talk a lot about the narrative and the story in my head. What is that? What is that? And what you're talking about, that focus on like, what is the emotion and letting myself sit with that and feel through it. That is the key to changing anything in your behavior that you want to change. You can't
Yes.
make meaningful, lasting change in your behavior if you don't let yourself feel the things you've been working so hard not to feel.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I think that's just so ironic. Like I don't want to feel it. I don't want to feel it,
Yeah.
but it never leaves you.
Right. It's going to keep bubbling up. I talk sometimes about suppressing emotions like holding a beach ball underwater. I don't know if you ever did that as a kid. Kind
Yeah.
of fun,
Of
when
course.
you're a
Yes.
kid. But like that can get hard to control. At some point, your arms are going to get tired and give out. And when that volleyball, when that beach ball splashes up, it's unpredictable. And that's
Yes.
what happens to us as human beings. These feelings that we work so hard to suppress will find a way out. And sometimes they're going to find a way out through that, like, I snap at my husband when it's not about him at all. It's something that I was suppressing from earlier in the day. Or it can also come out in physical illness, pain in my body.
Yes.
So yeah, our willingness to feel through all the stuff we've worked so hard not to feel is really magic. And is it all fun in the moment? No. But I will tell you, I have also at times been sitting with myself in deep tears, feeling all the visceral moving through my body. And I'm actually pleased in that moment because I know that this is taking me to a breakthrough. I know that I am letting go of something and raising my awareness in that moment through all that feeling. So if you can change your relationship with feeling, if you can change your relationship with emotions, all of that is part of a self acceptance practice. And it is so valuable for changing literally anything that you want to change, no matter how business focused it is.
Absolutely. So we also have high achievers, right? The high
Mm-hmm.
achievers are the ones that are already pushing through. They've accomplished a lot, but they can never turn off that motivation. And I'm largely like that. I'm learning to turn it off. But when I was growing up, coming home, I would talk to my dad and I'm like, hey, Dad, I got an A on whatever. He'd be like, why didn't you get an A plus? If I said,
Oh.
"Hey, Dad, I got a job. Did you ask for a raise?" Now, he was meaning it to be motivational. And by the way, my dad's 84 years old and he's still like that. He's like, you can do more, you can do better.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
it trains you, like it trained me to more, better, faster, more, better, faster. And
Hmm.
it's very hard for me to sit down and enjoy a
Hmm.
success or an
Hmm.
achievement because it's like more, better, faster, more, better, faster.
Yes.
And so how do you work with those high achievers that are stressed out because they can't relax? And I've learned, and I'm learning through my meditation and things like that to kind of turn it off and,
Hmm.
chill and relax. But how much stress do high achievers feel because they're constantly more, better, faster? And so let's talk a little bit about your perspective on that stress that high achievers feel and what can we do about that?
I think that stress for high achievers most of the time is like water to a fish. I'm sure you've
Mm.
heard that cute little story about an older fish that swims by a couple of younger fish and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And they keep swimming, and the young fish looks at the other young fish and says, "What the hell is water?" Right? Why would they even know what that is? They're just in it so constantly. And I can speak from my own experience as a self-described high achiever, and I had other people tell me that too. I would be in chronic states of stress, and it was such the norm for me that I wouldn't even be aware of how much I was stressed out. I might be aware of the extra high peaks, but it was just constant. And that's usually when I'm working with high achievers, that's what I hear from them is that it just feels constant. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. Even when they lie to themselves and say, if I just work through the weekend, then lies, 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 lies. And so, so this is where this is the part of the interview where I'm glad that your listeners can't directly throw anything at me because I want to drop a harsh truth, which is stress is a choice.
Mm.
And I was super triggered when I was first told that because I didn't want to believe that stress was a choice. I wanted to believe that the things in my life that were stressing me out would stress anybody out. And I didn't want to think that I was responsible or accountable until I realized, hold on, wouldn't it be nice though if I could unchoose stress?
Oh gosh, yes.
And unchoose stress without unchoosing this life. I still identify as a high achiever. And I'm not going to pretend I never experienced stress, but I experience a lot less stress now than I did years ago because of my understanding of how choice plays into it.
Mm.
So, obviously, at the surface, there are choices that people make to create the stressors in their lives. The jobs that they choose, how hard they choose to work, if they choose to bring children into the world and take on that huge responsibility, if they choose to be engaged in community organizations, if they choose to cook huge Thanksgiving dinner. There's all kinds of conscious choice that we can look at and say,
Hmm.
okay, I can see that I'm choosing this. But it gets deeper than that because it's never the actual situation that's stressing out people. It's the meaning that you're putting
Yeah.
on the situation. That's what's stressful. And even more than that, it's how are you putting the meaning on the situation that threatens how you want to see yourself? So, the easiest example of stress for high achievers is I have too much on my plate and I don't know how to meet all my obligations without letting people down. And so, we want to go deeper and say, okay, the meaning that you're putting on this is if you don't complete project A, you're going to let people down. Right there, that story may or may not be true. I have options that I can explore right there in terms of can we renegotiate the timeline? Can I see if I can get support from people? Right. Like I'm already telling myself a story. I'm choosing a story and the meaning that I'm putting on it to say I'm going to let them down. But then deeper than that, what if I do let somebody down? What do I think that says about me? I am choosing that too. This is a very
Um,
subconscious choice. This is the kind of distortion that I've been talking about that it comes from the upbringing where it's like, we don't let people down. We meet our commitments. And so, what do I think about myself if I let somebody down or if I don't follow through on a commitment? What does that mean about me? And normally it's some really dark, harsh judgment that I have toward myself, if I would dare not meet a commitment, that is what causes stress. So once again, like,
Wow.
can I surface that story? Can I get to the root of it? And can I let myself look at the judgment that I place on myself? I tell myself I'm afraid of how other people are going to feel, or I'm worried about letting them down. And that's true. And the deeper level always behind stress is, how am I actually judging myself here?
It always goes to what you're thinking, what you're feeling, your emotions. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is it's almost like as we're growing up in the educational system, we should be talking about finances and psychology throughout
Yes.
every single year
Life
of
skills,
life
life.
skills.
How do we not
Yes.
learn this stuff? It's crazy.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I talk to people like yourself that you're a psychologist, is it psychologist or psychiatrist?
Psychologist.
Psychologist. Okay, so you're Dr. Laura, you're a psychologist, you study all this, but when I talk to you, it's like, how do we not train or educate people on how critical it is to do the work, to
Mm-hmm.
feel all the feelings and the emotions, and as Brene Brown says, that shame and that vulnerability, it can take over your life if you let it.
Absolutely true.
So it's so important for us to have these kinds of conversations so that when you are working in the corporate space or in a business and you start feeling stress, all the examples that you provided are so telling of everything is a choice. And life is a choice. And we're obviously we live in the United States, so we're very fortunate that we still have choice regardless of
Mm-hmm.
what's happening, politically or in the world. But we're very fortunate that we still have choices, but we need to activate the choices and we need to be self-aware enough so that we can improve our lives and continue to improve those lives around us, specifically our children.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh gosh, what did I just want to say too about? So when we think about choice and everything being a choice, which I tend to agree with, sometimes if I can just let myself see that whatever I'm doing is a choice. Yes, I am choosing to cook a huge, extravagant Thanksgiving dinner. And I acknowledge that's putting a huge stressor on my time, and having 18 people at the house is, just what I'm just picking an example.
Mhm.
I can look at that. And if I'm telling myself a story that this is something that I have to do, like if my language is I need to, I should. Oof, I am
Yeah.
lacking accountability in that moment. But if I can say, I am choosing to do this, even if I still make the choice that is leading to me feeling stress, I'm actually going to feel less stressed simply by
Mhm.
recognizing that I'm choosing it. Because when we
Yeah.
tell ourselves a story that we're stuck or that we have to, that in and of itself can be a huge stressor because it triggers our fears around being powerless and helpless. So just even recognizing, okay, I recognize this is a choice and it's a choice I'm going to keep making, will actually already reduce the stress that you feel.
Mm. I I think that's so telling on stress reduction, even just acknowledging what you're doing and that you're choosing to do it in spite of all the, extra stress or the to-dos for
Mm-hmm.
that particular item. I think that's absolutely incredible. Well, Dr. Laura, I did not expect to talk so much about how critically important that radical self-acceptance is, and then everything that kind of goes underneath it. I know you're a speaker yourself and you have, talks about radical self-acceptance. So if there's anybody in the corporate world that's listening, you might want to reach out to Dr. Laura, because this conversation is so important. And if we start teaching this in the corporations, in schools, we would do so much better as human beings, just to, again, not be as judgmental and critical. And one of the things that I always think about is like, why are people so critical of other people? It's just like,
Yeah.
like, for example, I did a podcast with a trans woman over a year ago, and someone made it a point to put a nasty comment in on the podcast. And I'm like, why do you take time out of your life
Mm-hmm.
to listen to something that you don't agree with and
Yeah.
then put a nasty comment about the guest? I'm like, I
Yeah.
just don't understand that. I'm always like, live and let live, take what is good for you, and then let everybody else do whatever it is that they want to do in their life.
Absolutely. And
So,
and the answer there is there's a huge self-acceptance gap. The and just in the same way that when I am sometimes judgmental and critical of other people, even in my own head, that shows me a self-acceptance gap. If I am going to seek somebody out on a podcast and then leave a nasty comment, that person is actually in so much pain about how much they're judging themselves. They probably
mm,
don't let themselves feel it, to your point about
yeah,
feeling, but they make these choices to put other people down or attack other people as a temporary way to try to make themselves feel better, which is, I feel like we learned that maybe in kindergarten. They're just
yeah,
picking on you to feel better about themselves. But it's so true. And it continues into adulthood. And so that magic of compassion plays in here too, which is like, how can I let somebody know what's okay or not okay? So set a boundary and still have compassion for whatever battle they are fighting internally that I have no idea about, but I know it's there
yeah,
because they're choosing to be so critical and attack somebody in this way.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, all of the topics that we talked about are just pure magic. So, if there was one tip that you wanted to leave somebody with as far as an action that they can start implementing today, what would that be for you?
I would love for your listeners to practice taking credit. And it speaks to what you spoke about earlier, Rosie, not letting yourself celebrate.
Hmm.
Most people who feel like stuck or, people who identify as high achievers tend to gloss over all of the things that they do well, all of the ways that they're making progress because they're so focused on the gap ahead of them that they fail to see the gain behind. So
Mm,
taking credit is a practice of allowing yourself to feel good, even for a brief moment, about progress that you've made. It's like I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I would enjoy hiking in the foothills and the mountains near my house. And I would sometimes be hiking and it's a lovely day. Maybe it's extremely hot because it's Phoenix and it's the desert.
hmm.
And I'm still looking at how much further I have to go. But if I stop and I look around and I turn behind me, whoa, look how far I've come.
Yeah.
And that's a step that too many of us gloss over all the time. And so taking credit is that practice to say, even if I'm not yet at my goal, I'm going to allow myself to feel good about where I'm at. There's nothing too small to take credit for. And it might feel like a foreign and unfamiliar and weird practice to people who've never done it before. That's not a good reason not to do it.
Yeah.
Not a good reason not to do it. So practice taking credit. You can get an accountability partner if you want. Do it via text. If you can do it even once a day, that will have compounding effects and you will grow your self awareness pretty dramatically over the course of even 1 year.
That's awesome. Okay, so last thing, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you work with your clients. I know you have a quiz, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the quiz is to really help you get a feel for, well, where is my self acceptance? And we're looking at that paradox theory I mentioned of self acceptance and self improvement. So if you go to selfacceptancequiz.com, hopefully nice and easy, just
Hmm.
selfacceptancequiz.com. It only takes about 3 minutes, maybe four, to complete it. And then you're going to get a report immediately that lets you know, hey, in this 2x2 matrix, self acceptance and self improvement, where do you fall right now? This is, a point in
Hmm.
time. It's
Yes.
absolutely something that can and will change, especially if you want it to. Where do you fall right now? And then you're going to get several coaching emails to follow up based on your results to help you really think through, okay, so what's contributed to me being where I am? And what are some specific things that I can work to do now to shift myself more where I want to go? And I do tend to assume that people want to be where I want to be and where I've worked to be, which is high self acceptance and high self improvement.
Mm.
and it's a journey. So I can keep doing both, right? So yeah, I would love for your listeners to check that out if this resonates with them and they're curious. And I actually do a lot of work in the organizational setting, which I'm really grateful for. When leaders bring me in and I get to work with groups of people who would not otherwise get to know these ideas and these concepts, it's powerful and it
Yes.
transforms the team in terms of how they communicate with each other. It grows trust. Like we create psychologically safe environments for teams, and it's so rewarding work. I love it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you do that psychological safety because that's so important. Again, I think a lot of corporations in this day and age, they're really trying to see the person, the employee as a human being and not just as a
Yes.
number, not just as
Yes.
an employee. So I know that a lot of companies are doing that. So, but I'm so excited that you're working with them because this work needs to get out there in the world along with, Brene Brown. She does so much work around, these types of concepts as well. But for
Yeah.
you to actually come and teach this and make that change management in corporations, it's just wonderful. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Laura, for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. So I absolutely love it when there's a lot of synergy between the guest and myself about the topics that we're passionate about. Dr. Laura provided us with such amazing brilliance that I want to just take a few minutes to talk about the key items that she brought up. First of all, self acceptance fuels growth. She says that accepting yourself doesn't mean settling, it actually accelerates your personal and professional growth. The second key item is that stress is a choice. Who knew? High achievers often live in constant stress, but recognizing it as a choice gives you the power to unchoose it, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And then the last thing that she said was to celebrate your wins, to take time to acknowledge how far you've come. It's definitely a practice and it builds confidence and clarity. I personally have done that the last couple of years at the insistence of one of my coaches. And it really makes a difference when you go back and you make a list of all of your accomplishments and you see how many things you actually got done. So I highly recommend that. She actually leaves us with one amazing tip, which is start a taking credit practice. So at the end of each day, jot down one thing that you did well, no matter how small it is, and take credit for that. She says it is a game changer. Also, Dr. Laura leaves us with a gift, which is her self-acceptance quiz, and I believe it's an absolute must try. So head over to selfacceptancequiz.com to discover where you stand and get personalized coaching tips. And speaking of quizzes, I also want to encourage you to take the promotion readiness quiz. This is your first step to figure out where you are in your career and what you need to do to move forward to the next step. And finally, don't forget to check out the Unlock the Leader Within membership. It is the ultimate resource for women to get ready to advance in their careers. All of the links, including the self-acceptance quiz and the membership details, are in the episode website in the show notes. So that's just a click away. Well, so this episode, I believe, was packed with actionable tips to show you how to show up confidently and take control in your growth journey. If you're waiting for a sign to invest in yourself, this is it. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.